Welcome back, darlings, to the podcast Life Looks Different Now. I'm your host, Slandy Noel. In this podcast, we focus on reading one chapter from the Bible every week, doing our best to decipher the Word of God, learning its rules, its laws, its principles, and apply them to our daily lives. Last week, we read from Genesis chapter 20, and we ended the season by reading Genesis chapter 20. And in Genesis chapter 20, we learned that once again, Abraham lied about his wife, Sarah, being his wife. He was claiming to King Abimelech that his wife, Sarah, is only his sister. And that, really, if God did not intervene, and to make sure that King Abimelech did not touch Sarah. God wanted to make sure that that woman did not get tempted, because remember, God just promised him that the promised child will be born within a year. So God had to intervene to make sure that King Abimelech did not lay with Sarah, so there won't be any doubt as to who the father of Isaac will be, who is going to be the father of the child who Sarah will be carrying soon. Praise God for that, because we learned that Abraham had done the same thing before in the past, where the Pharaoh took Sarah as his own, married her, and laid with her. But this time, God had to intervene to make sure that Sarah get the blessing that God has promised Abraham and Sarah, that Sarah will bear the child, and there will not be any question of the paternity. So God went and talked to King Abimelech in a dream, letting him know that he took someone else's wife. And King Abimelech was innocent in the matter. He didn't know that this woman of 89 years old was Abraham's wife. He didn't know, because he's been lied to. So of course, naturally, he went to Abraham and said, why would you lie to me? Why would you bring this curse onto me? Why would you put me in this position? He's your wife and he's more wealth. So we're learning that, Abraham, even after, working with God for 24 years, even though that man was pushing 100, he still was in the learning process. He was still making mistakes, still making many faux pas. And there we ended, the season 1. So go back and listen to the last 20 episodes. There are so many things we need to learn. There are so many things we can learn from these stories. Now, this week, we are starting season 2 of the podcast. And to start season 2 of the podcast, we are going to read Genesis chapter 21, the birth of Isaac, the birth of the long-awaited promised child of Abraham and Sarah. Let's see what we can learn, from these upcoming stories. Let's see the lessons, the rules, the laws that we can learn from these stories, and how we can apply them to our own lives today. So let's go ahead to reading Genesis chapter 21, the birth of Isaac. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah will nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son. For the son of the slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, put it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in this wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of those bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite of him in a good way off, about the distance of a bowshot. For she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my descendants or with my prosperity or with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me with the land where you have sojourned." And Abraham said, "I will swear." When Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, "I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me. I have not heard of it until today." So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart, and Abimelech said to Abraham, "What is the meaning of these 7 lambs that you have set apart?" He said, "These 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well." Therefore, that place was called Beersheba, because there both of the men swore an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose up and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. My, oh my. Season 2 is going to be very interesting. It's going to be very interesting. So in Genesis chapter 21 here to, open season 2, we are learning of the birth of Isaac, the long awaited promised child of Abraham. Now remember, 25 years prior, God called Abraham to leave his family behind, to leave, and to move into an uncertain space. To move. He wasn't sure as to where he was going to be moving to. He trusted God. When God called him to move forward, he just got up and moved. And God has blessed Abraham. God has given Abraham so much wealth. And God promised to Abraham that he will give him an heir from his own loin. And he will be giving him a son through his wife Sarah, who was barren. His wife Sarah, of course, we learned, was a stunning woman, a beautiful woman, that everywhere she went, people took notice of her beauty. Many took notice, yet this woman was barren. God made her barren because God wanted to prove to Abraham how great he really is. So here we are, 25 years after the promise that Abraham will have a son through Sarah. The child God promised him, the child God had, promised to Sarah even, is finally born. He's finally born. And they named him Isaac, just like God has commended Abraham to call the child. Because the name Isaac in Hebrew means he who laughs or rejoice. That's what his name means. Remember when the Lord and the two angels visited Abraham and Sarah a couple of chapters ago, Sarah overheard the conversation about her bearing a child around this time of year. A year from that day. She didn't believe it. She laughed. She thought it was a joke. And the Lord asked, why did Sarah laugh? And she tried to deny it. But nevertheless, God did not punish her. God simply said the name of the child will be Isaac. And because really that child is really a wonderful blessing to Abraham and Sarah. Sarah was 90 years old when she gave birth to that child, and Abraham was 100 years old. 25 years Abraham had to wait. Have you ever had to wait on a promise from God for so long that you become so discouraged? 25 years he waited. Then we learned that when Isaac turned 8 years old, Abraham circumcised him, just like God had commended for Abraham to do. Because remember, Abraham now has to circumcise every male of his family. All of his descendants will be circumcised. Every single male will be circumcised, because that is the covenant that Abraham had made with God. And really, to prove that covenant, all of Abraham's descendants have to circumcise their boys. Now, Abraham did not throw a feast when the child was born. Abraham did not throw a feast, to celebrate the birth of the child. He didn't. But when the child was weaned, meaning this child was no longer at risk of, infant death, because we know that the first 3 years of a child, these are the most, critical years. Many children die through childbirth. Mothers die as well. Many children die from, from microbes and diseases when they're very young. So when a child hit 3 years old, the chances of them dying decrease dramatically. And Abraham knew that. So he waited until this child was weaned off his mother's breast. And he decided to celebrate with his friends, with his families, and, and the neighbors. He threw this huge feast to praise God, to celebrate the 3 years life of Isaac. Although many people have said to wean off, and when I was reading the commentaries in regards to Isaac and Sarah and Abraham, and what it means to wean off a child. I mean, some will say, said that some kids will used to be breastfed until they're 5 or even 12 years old. But we know from really reading those old texts and going back to the Hebrew commentaries, it's really about 3 years old when these children used to be weaned off their mother's breast. And so, of course, Abraham is celebrating that. Everyone is celebrating with him. And at that point, Sarah noticed Ishmael laughing. Now, please remember, Ishmael is the son of Abraham. Remember how Ishmael entered the world. It was Sarah's idea to give her slave girl to Abraham, who at the time was 85 years old. And this young woman, Hagar, was just a girl, and she had no autonomy. She became a surrogate for Sarah. So Sarah desperately wanted a child, right? And she knew she was barren. She couldn't have any more children because she was no longer on her cycle. She was a very old woman. And she gave her servant girl, Hagar, to old Abraham to lay with, so she could be a surrogate. And Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. And we learn even then that Sarah became very angry when Hagar would disobey her, and Hagar looked down on her because Hagar was pregnant. Now, mind you, Sarah weaved that web. She caused the issue in the first place. You see, she was the one who went to her husband and offered this child to the husband. How many men do we know who say no to that? Old men to be with a young woman, a young child. It was already a disturbing story for me, and now here we are. Sarah became very envious, very jealous, very angry. There's nothing here in the text says that Ishmael was abusive towards the child. It simply said that she noticed that Ishmael was laughing. In other words, Sarah did not even want Ishmael to be, to be joyful. And truth is, even if Ishmael was teasing the brother, I mean, that's what children do. That's what brothers do. Now, Ishmael at this time was probably about 16 years old. 16, maybe 17 years old when the brother is 3, and she noticed that. She became angry, and she went to her husband and demanded that her husband banished the slave woman. And here, in Genesis chapter 21, I've heard many commentaries saying, oh, well, Abraham married Hagar. Listen, in Genesis chapter 21 here, it's pretty clear. Sarah said, I want you to banish the slave woman. You see what I mean? Like, to put her in her place. So Hagar knows, you are nothing here. You are just a slave woman. She specifically said, I want you to banish the slave woman with her son. Not with your son, with her son. Now, mind you, this is a son that Sarah wanted. Sarah played the role here. Sarah caused the stir. Listen, I'm telling you, it's to me, it's so disturbing. It is so disturbing. And I'm not going to lie and say that I like Sarah, because I do not. I do not. As a woman, as a mother, as a Black woman who I knew my ancestors, the women who came before me had no autonomy to their bodies whatsoever. And knowing that group of other women, white women, were okay with their husbands raping the slave women, you know what I mean? And discard them like they're trash, like yesterday's trash. And this is what Sarah just did here to the the woman, to Hagar, who was just an innocent person in all of this. She was just a child, and these old people used her. And now that she no longer served the purpose to Sarah, she decided to banish her and the son. And the text tells us that caused Abraham a lot of distress. Of course, it caused him a lot of distress. That was his child. That was his son. And for the past 16, 17 years, he's been taking care of this son. This child has lived a wonderful life because his father is a wealthy man. His father is, high reputable man in the community. This kid was treated like a prince, and now he's being banished. It goes to show you, when people are saying that marriage is only a piece of paper, marriage is not important. Ladies, let me make it very clear to you. Being a side chick, a side woman, a concubine, and dinette, okay, dinette. Unless a man marries you, don't even think to bear him children. Don't give him those wonderful privileges of your womb. You see, because they basically used Hagar and discarded her and her child. This is a young man who was raised as a prince, who had all the wonderful privileges. Even though he was the son of a slave woman, he was Abraham's son. And now this young man and his mother is being thrown out of the house into the wilderness. And the text specifically tells us that they are being thrown into the wilderness. And Abraham is distressed. And God came to talk to Abraham and said, don't upset yourself about this child. I'm going to take care of him. I've already made you a promise that he will be a great nation. So God told Abraham to do what his wife told him to do. Let me say it again. What a terrible, terrible woman. I said what I said. And if people disagree with me, I don't care how religious you are, Christian you are, and listen, I said what I said. Sarah was not a good woman. And I'm going to say it again. I will shout it from the mountaintop. And as far as I'm concerned, this is not the quality of a woman who will punish a child. Now, mind you, she's already put, this child's mother, who was just a kid herself, in a whole pickle, put a whole different position. I don't care what the custom of the day was. I'm going to say it again. I do not care what the custom of the day was. That it was normal to give a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old child to a grown man, to an old man. I think we all know right from wrong. I think we all know, that is not okay. Just because, the culture is doing something doesn't mean we have to partake in it. And that's what these individuals did. And God is saying, I've made a promise to you that because Ishmael is your child, he's your son, I'm going to take care of her. And what did Abraham do? He just gave, Hagar, he woke up early in the morning, gave Hagar a skin of water and some bread, and put her outside in the wilderness with his son Ishmael. I'm sure it was heartbroken for Abraham to watch his son go. I'm sure he was, but nevertheless, he had to do it. So they're out there in the wilderness. They're done using the water and the bread, and who knows how long it took them, to maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. We don't know. The text doesn't tell us. And here's Hagar now having to watch her son died. Because, I mean, we can live only so long without food, right? Without water. None of us can go a week without water. Without being hydrated. You're going to die. We can live up to 30 days without food. That's true, but not without water. So here she is having to watch her son go through that, to suffer like that. Now, this is a prince who's been raised with hand and foot. Everybody's taking care of him because he was the only child. And the provisions, there was no more provisions. Again, ladies, I'm telling you, I know we live in a culture today that's telling us it's okay to be a side chick. Don't do it. Don't do it. Although it's pretty clear here that Hagar was just a child. It was not her fault. She was the innocent party here. She was the innocent party. Nevertheless, it's still a lesson for all of us. Don't let folks come in and use you. And here we see that this child is dehydrated. He's dying, and his mother put him under a tree, and then she walked, 100 feet away from him, and because she didn't want to watch her child died, and she screamed and cried and wept. I cannot even imagine. As a mother, as a mom, I am a mother of 2 children, and I have a 16-year-old son. I cannot imagine my son Christian, for me not to be able to provide food for my son, for my child, where he's dying, and I have to watch that. So naturally she wept, she's screaming, she is begging God, please see me, see this. Look what's happening to this child. And the angel of heaven heard her cry, heard this mother's cry as she was weeping. The angel from heaven spoke to Hagar. The voice, and the angel said, we heard the voice of the boy called out to Hagar. Hagar, what distressed you? Of course, you already know what distressed her. You already know. She feared for her child. And the voice said, Ishmael is going to be okay. God has heard the voice of Ishmael. And the angel commanded Hagar to lift the boy up, and God will make a great nation out of him. So don't leave him on the floor. Don't leave him there on the ground like that, dying. Lift him up. And right there, God opened the eyes of Hagar, and she saw a well of water. And she filled up the skin and gave Ishmael water to drink. Then we learned that Ishmael grew up in the desert. He grew up in the wilderness. He grew up in the wilderness because he was not the promised child. Now we know all of the inheritance, all of the promises, all of the covenant, everything is going to be passed on to Isaac. Ishmael, on the other hand, who's just an innocent party in all this, just a child. He didn't ask to be born under such circumstances. And here he is now. He has to adapt to the wilderness. You see, the human beings, we can adapt to just about anything. Just about anything. If something is slowly introduced to you, you normalize it. In this position, he was just dumped in the wilderness. It was a matter of fight or flight situation. And he thrived in the wilderness. Fight or flight. He decided to fight to live. And he thrived there. He became an expert with the bow. He grew, became a grown adult, and his mother took an Egyptian wife for him. I'm telling you, I'm distressed about this whole thing. When I was young, and when my dad used to tell the story, I thought that Ishmael was a baby when Hagar and Ishmael were put out there in the wilderness. I didn't realize, with my small brain, my young brain, I didn't realize that Ishmael was already a teenager. who had lived a wonderful life, who was then dumped in the wilderness. But as I'm reading this chapter with adult eyes, as a mother, and as a mother of a teenage son, I have a much better understanding as to what's happening here. I cannot even imagine me being put in that position and having to watch my son suffer. I cannot. But the child grew. He became a man, strong man, even in the wilderness. And he lived there and got married and built his own family. Shortly thereafter, we learned that King Abimelech and the commander of his army, Phicol, seek a covenant with Abraham because they recognized that God's favor was upon Abraham. Because remember, God chose Abraham. Not because Abraham was that special. God just chose him. I know people say God does not have favorites. I beg to differ. I beg to differ. As a Christian woman, as I am reading the Word of God, as I am reading the Bible, I'm telling you, there is such a thing as favorites. I've heard people say, as parents who have many children, they'll always say, I don't have a favorite. I love my children just the same. Lies, lies, and more lies. Okay? So it's pretty clear here, God chose Abraham. And I like to believe that I'm God's favorite. As far as I'm concerned, God takes care of all my needs. There's really nothing that I want that God has not provided for me. Even when things seem gloom and I turn to the Lord. I put my gaze on him and he takes care of my needs. So I truly believe there is such a thing as favor, because here we see King Abimelech, who's also a man who believes in God. Even he recognized that Abraham has a blessing on him, that Abraham has great favor from the Lord. God's favor is upon Abraham. Okay, and he went to Abraham and he asked, for them to really have a covenant together, to work together. And the king asked that, Abraham deal with him fair and honest, just like he has done with Abraham. Remember, King Abimelech, gave Abraham a lot of wealth when he learned that Sarah was his wife and when he took Sarah. And as we can see here, the king is recognizing that Abraham has a blessing on him. And Abraham, agreed to the pact. He swore that he would deal kindly with Abimelech and all of his descendants. And he'll deal with him fair and honestly. And Abraham complained to King Abimelech at this point that his men have taken over Abraham's well. So Abraham is now saying, wait a minute now. Well, your men, your soldiers, your people have taken over a well that I've dug. This is my space. And they took it over. And King Abimelech claimed that he had never heard of such a well. He's like, wait a minute. Until you just told me today, I didn't even know this was happening. He didn't know. And at that point, Abraham gave oxen and sheep to King Abimelech, and then he set apart 7 ewe lambs, to give to King Abimelech, and to prove that he wants to make sure that he gets the claim back to that well. And King Abimelech agreed and gave him back his well. So now he had full rights to the well, and no one else will ever be able to just come and claim this space, this well, to be theirs. And we learned that the commander Phicol took his army as well as King Abimelech, and they went back to the Philistine area. Abraham got his well back. He planted a tamarisk tree and named the place Beersheba. and he gave God all the glory and praised God for having his land there. And he was sojourning in the space of the Philistine, but he had all this land, all this wealth, and everything was going just right for him, because again, Abraham was the chosen one. Listen, I hope you are learning, with alongside me as I'm learning these things. My eyes are open. I'm seeing these stories as adults. I'm reading them as adults and have a different understanding. I hope you're doing the same. And if you have any questions, concerns, or you feel like in some way that maybe I'm a bit too harsh on Sarah, I don't know. I mean, for me as a mother, as a woman, I hold women to even higher standards. I really do, because I feel like we mothers, we are holding the gate here for safety, for security. And if we don't take care of one another, who will? If we don't see to it that we take care of the young women in our communities, who's going to do it? Right? And I felt like Sarah fell short. And I'm going to say it again. I said what I said. She fell short in that area. And she's not someone that I personally will trust. I mean, from reading this, I'm like, God, I don't know if I would want to be a servant of such a person or to be friends with such a person. That's just me. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Share your thoughts on this with me. And I know in the Christian faith, every time I hear these stories, or every time I hear a pastor preach on this, they paint Abraham and Sarah as these wonderful and good and innocent and blameless individuals. But from reading these texts here, I don't see them that way. I see them as very flawed individuals, selfish even. They are no different. These individuals were no different from the rest of us. They were not. Their nature, their sinful nature, is really showing in those pages. So share your thoughts. I want to hear from you. I truly do. And I thank you for tuning in to season 2. Thank you for staying here with me. Thank you for continuing on this journey. I truly appreciate you. I'm praying for you. I'm thinking of you. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Until next time, darlings. Bisous.